Daniel Carter had always been small. Too small for the war, too small for the world, too small for the weight that had been placed on his shoulders. At 16, he was just another nameless refugee in the ruins of Zephyr Prime, a world that had once been the beating heart of an empire. But today, Daniel was more than just another survivor. He crouched behind the remains of a shattered hover skiff, his heartbeat steady despite the distant echoes of gunfire. The sky above was thick with smog and the faint, shimmering remnants of orbital bombardments. The once pristine towers of the Zephyr Dominion lay in ruins, toppled by years of rebellion, betrayal, and the slow, inevitable decay of power. For centuries, the Zephyr had ruled with absolute dominance, their queen, Sovereign Zalzira, controlling the vast expanse of the known galaxy with an iron grip. Their fleets had conquered thousands of worlds, their legions had crushed any resistance, and their technology had seemed unstoppable. But everything ended eventually, even empires. Daniel adjusted the scarf around his neck, pulling it up to filter the dust from his lungs. His left hand gripped a small metallic device, an encoded data crystal, its faint blue glow the only thing illuminating the darkness around him. This wasn't just another piece of scavenged tech. It was something far more important. Somewhere in the endless catacombs beneath Zephyr Prime, the last unbroken chamber of the Queen's command network still functioned, hidden from the chaos above. The Dominion had fallen, their ships burned, their armies scattered, but Zalzira had not been found. Not yet. Daniel was going to change that. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps, heavy metallic. Enforcers. He pressed himself against the wreckage, his breathing shallow. Zephyr bio-soldiers were still active in the ruins, remnants of a once unbreakable force. Unlike the organic nobility of the Dominion, enforcers had no loyalty, no hesitation. They followed orders, even if those orders came from ghosts. 3 of them emerged from the smoke. Their bodies were covered in segmented exoskeletal armor, their elongated heads framed by intricate bronze plating. Their eyes glowed a dull green, scanning the streets with methodical precision. Daniel held still. If they spotted him, he wouldn't have a chance. One of the enforcers raised an arm, a scanner sweeping the debris. A faint hum filled the air as the device analyzed heat signatures, searching for anything alive. Daniel felt his fingers tighten around the data crystal. Then, before the scanner could reach his position, an explosion rocked the skyline. Fire erupted 3 blocks away, sending plumes of smoke into the already choked air. The enforcers snapped their heads toward the disturbance, their focus shifting. Daniel didn't hesitate. He moved, sliding between wreckage. He sprinted down the alley, his boots silent on the cracked pavement. He had spent years learning to survive in these ruins, and speed was the only thing that had ever kept him alive. The enforcers wouldn't chase him yet. They would investigate the explosion first. But time was running out. His destination was close. The entrance to the tunnels was buried beneath a collapsed section of the old city, hidden behind layers of rubble that had once been part of an ancient Zephyr monument. Daniel reached it in minutes, panting as he slipped into the darkness. The air was colder underground. The tunnels beneath Zephyr Prime were remnants of an older era, long before the Dominion had risen to power. Some said they were the bones of a lost civilization, buried and forgotten. Others believed they were something even older. Daniel didn't care. He just needed to move. His path was marked by old glow strips, their fading blue light guiding him deeper into the labyrinth. He followed them, counting his steps, feeling the weight of the data crystal pressing against his palm. He wasn't alone down here. A figure stepped from the shadows ahead, a rifle slung across his back. Nathan Cole. The man was a legend, ex-soldier, resistance leader, the last real commander of the rebellion. "You're late," Cole muttered, eyes scanning the tunnels behind Daniel. "Did you get it?" Daniel nodded and held up the crystal. Cole exhaled sharply. "You have no idea what this means, kid. What's on it?" Cole gave him a look. The final coordinates of the Queen's stronghold. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. This was it, the moment that could end the war. The last battle was about to begin. Daniel tightened his grip on the data crystal, his pulse hammering in his ears. The final location of the Zyphery Queen. The last unbroken stronghold of the Dominion. For years, the war had dragged on, and the Zyphery's empire had collapsed piece by piece. But sovereign Zelzira remained, a specter in the shadows, rallying the remnants of her forces for one last, desperate stand. Nathan Cole reached for the crystal, but Daniel hesitated. "What's the plan?" he asked. Cole studied him for a long moment. The old soldier was battle-worn, his face carved with lines that spoke of years spent in the trenches. His reputation was larger than life. One of the last surviving commanders of the human resistance, a man who had fought the Zyphery across 100 battlefields. "We verified the coordinates," Cole said finally. "Then we hit her, hard and fast, before she has time to disappear again." Daniel exhaled slowly. "You think she still has an army?" Cole's expression darkened. "She doesn't need an army. Just the right weapons in the right hands." That was the real fear. The Dominion was broken, but Zelzira had ruled for centuries. The Zyphery weren't just conquerors. They were engineers, creators of bioweapons and horrors beyond human understanding. If she had anything left, any secret weapons, any hidden technology, she could still turn the tide. And if she fell, the war would finally end. Cole activated a portable terminal, inserting the data crystal. The device whirred, decrypting the contents. Daniel and Cole watched as a map flickered into view, a vast underground network, deeper than any known Zyphery city. At the very center, marked in glowing red, was the final stronghold. "Grid 47K, Cole muttered. Beneath the ruins of the Imperial Palace. Daniel's stomach clenched. He had seen the palace from a distance before it fell. It had been a monument to Zyphery power, a vast structure of impossible spires and glowing biometal designed to remind lesser species of their place. Now, it was nothing but a broken skeleton, buried in the dust of its own arrogance. But beneath it, something still lived. Cole shut off the terminal and looked at Daniel. "We move at dawn." Daniel swallowed hard. He had spent years surviving in the ruins of this war, scavenging, hiding, running. But this was different. This was the endgame. A part of him wanted to run, to disappear into the void and never look back. But another part, the part that had lost everything to the Zyphery, burned with something stronger. Resolve. The attack team assembled before sunrise. Daniel had expected an army, but instead, there were only 5 of them. 5 against whatever nightmares lurked beneath the palace. Cole, 2 ex-Marines from the original resistance, Hale and Vex. A Zyphery defector named Kale. And Daniel. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even supposed to be here. But Cole had made it clear. Daniel had found the crystal, and now he had a part to play. They moved through the ruins in silence, the weight of the mission pressing down on all of them. The closer they got to the palace, the heavier the air became. The ground beneath them wasn't just rubble. It was scorched, twisted, corrupted by whatever dark sciences the Dominion had once wielded. When they reached the entrance, Kale stepped forward. "Still think we're walking into a trap?" Hale muttered. Kale's insectoid features shifted slightly, his mandibles clicking. "It is not a trap, but it is not abandoned, either." Daniel shivered. Kale had once been part of the Dominion Science Cast, an engineer specializing in weapons technology. He had defected 2 years ago, claiming that the Zyphery had gone too far, that Zelzira had been preparing something monstrous beneath the palace before the war even began, something that had never been unleashed. They descended into the tunnels. The deeper they went, the more the walls changed. At first, it was just stone and steel, but soon, the architecture shifted into something more organic. Pulsing biometal. Strange, vein-like structures glowing with eerie green light. The Zyphery had always blended technology with biology, but this place felt different. It felt alive. Daniel could hear something in the distance, a faint, rhythmic pulse, like the slow breathing of some enormous creature. He wasn't sure if it was the structure itself or something deeper inside. Then they reached the first barrier, a massive door, seamless and alien. It looked like bone fused with metal, its surface rippling as if sensing their presence. Kale moved forward, placing a clawed hand against the structure. The door shuddered, then slowly began to open. Beyond it was darkness. Cold. Endless. Cole took point, weapon raised. Stay close. No mistakes. Daniel's fingers tightened around his sidearm. He had never fired it outside of training. He wasn't sure if he was ready. But ready or not, there was no turning back. They stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a slow, final hiss. And deep within the shadows ahead, something stirred. The corridor stretched ahead in eerie silence, the walls pulsing with a sickly green glow. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, charged with something unnatural. Daniel's every step felt like a mistake, like he was walking straight into the jaws of something waiting, watching. Then the lights changed. One by one, the glowing veins in the walls shifted from green to deep crimson. The rhythmic pulsing sound intensified, vibrating in his chest like a second heartbeat. Cale tensed, his mandibles clicking. "We are not alone." Hale raised his rifle. No kidding. What gave it away? The creepy walls, or the feeling that we're being hunted? Then the first scream echoed down the corridor. It wasn't human. It was something else. A deep, resonant wail that sent ice crawling through Daniel's veins. Something primal. Something wrong. "Move!" Cole ordered. They rushed forward, navigating the twisting passageways as the sound grew closer. Daniel's mind raced. He had expected guards, Zyphery remnants protecting their queen. But this wasn't the orderly defense of an empire. It felt like something wilder, more desperate, something broken. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. Not Zyphery soldiers, not even recognizable as anything living. They were twisted, bodies contorted, spines elongated, eyes melted into empty sockets. Their exoskeletons were fractured, reshaped into jagged, unnatural patterns. Some crawled on all fours, their movements erratic, insect-like. Others stood on two legs, their faces hollow, their jaws unhinged. And they charged. Cole fired first, a controlled burst of plasma rounds lighting up the dark. The nearest creature took the shots directly to its chest, but barely slowed, only stumbling before launching itself forward again. "Take them down!" Cole shouted. Daniel's training kicked in. He raised his pistol and fired, but his hands were shaking. His first shot went wide. His second grazed one of the creatures, but it didn't stop. Vex hurled a plasma grenade down the corridor. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion lit up the passageway, sending chunks of biometal and flesh in every direction. But more of them were coming. Too many. Daniel's breathing was ragged. This wasn't a normal fight. These weren't normal enemies. The Zyphery were meticulous, disciplined, and strategic. But these things were rabid. Cole grabbed Cale by the shoulder. "What the hell is this?" Cale's mandibles twitched, his voice low and urgent. "She's trying to ascend." Daniel didn't understand, but they didn't have time for explanations. They ran. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the underground structure. The deeper they went, the worse it became. The walls were no longer pulsing. They were bleeding, dark liquid oozing from between the cracks. The architecture had warped, bending into impossible organic shapes. A new sound echoed ahead. Breathing. Massive. Hollow. Like the inhalation of something too large to exist. Then they saw it. A cavernous chamber stretching beyond their vision. In its center, suspended above a vast pit of writhing biomass, was a massive cocoon-like structure. Tendrils of pulsing energy stretched from it, connecting to the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The entire chamber was alive, feeding off whatever was inside. And in the center of it all was her. Sovereign Zalzira, or at least, what was left of her. The Zyphery Queen had always been a towering figure of control and precision. But now, her form was distorted, shifting, struggling against the cocoon that encased her. Her exoskeleton cracked and reshaped itself, her multiple eyes flickering between lucidity and madness. She wasn't just hiding. She was evolving. Cale's voice was barely above a whisper. "She is trying to become something else." Cole leveled his rifle. "Not on our watch." He fired. The plasma bolt struck the cocoon, sending ripples of energy through its structure. Zalzira screamed, a sound that wasn't just heard but felt deep in their bones. The chamber trembled, and then the ground collapsed. Daniel fell. Darkness swallowed him, and for the first time, he truly felt like he was about to die. Daniel hit the ground hard, his vision blurred, lungs struggling to pull in air as the impact sent a sharp jolt of pain through his body. The world spun around him, a chaotic swirl of shadows, crimson light, and the grotesque pulse of organic walls. Somewhere above, he heard Cole shouting orders. Plasma fire crackled. The inhuman screeches of the twisted Zyphery filled the air, merging with the Queen's haunting wail. But Daniel was falling deeper. The ground beneath him wasn't solid. It was alive, shifting, pulling him further into the depths of the chamber. His fingers clawed at the surface, searching for something to hold on to. But the material was slick, like flesh coated in thick, pulsating fluid. Then he saw her. Not the Queen in her cocoon, another version of her. Suspended just beneath the surface, trapped in a half-formed state, was a different Zalzira. Her form flickered, her exoskeleton incomplete, her eyes empty pools of shifting color. It was as if she was splitting herself apart, one version ascending, the other decaying. A violent tremor shook the chamber. Above, Cole and the others were fighting for their lives, their weapons lighting up the darkness. Vex threw a plasma grenade into the mass of creatures swarming toward them, the explosion sending chunks of twisted flesh in every direction. But it wasn't enough. Kale shouted something in his native tongue, desperate, urgent. Daniel barely processed the words before the cocoon above began to rupture. A single arm burst free. It was wrong. The chitinous plating of the Zyphery was gone, replaced by something raw and unnatural. The limb twisted in ways it shouldn't, its structure both solid and fluid, constantly reshaping itself. Then came the voice. You should not have come. It wasn't spoken. It was felt, reverberating inside Daniel's skull. The others reacted instantly. Cole staggered back, clutching his helmet as if it could block out the sound. Hale dropped to his knees, weapons slipping from his fingers. Even Kale, hardened warrior that he was, trembled. Daniel's mind burned. He wasn't hearing words. He was seeing them. Images flashing through his thoughts at impossible speeds. A galaxy in flames. The Zyphery rising, consuming. The Queen standing at the center of it all, unbound by form, unshackled by flesh. This wasn't just evolution. It was apotheosis. She wasn't becoming a stronger Zyphery. She was becoming something else. Something that shouldn't exist. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. His heart pounded in his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel her, inside him, rewriting his thoughts, his memories, his very sense of self. And for the first time in his life, he realized he was about to lose himself. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Not the Queen's. Not his own. His mother's. You're stronger than what they make you believe. Daniel's eyes snapped open. The images shattered. The voices broke. The Queen's hold on his mind fractured. And in that instant, he knew what he had to do. With the last of his strength, he reached out. Not toward the Queen, but toward the half-formed version of her trapped beneath the surface. She was the key. If the Queen was trying to ascend, then something about this broken, unfinished part of her was holding her back. And that meant Daniel punched through the membrane. The world screamed. The Queen's wail turned to agony, her transformation stalling. The twisted creatures around them froze, their bodies seizing as if something vital had been severed. Cole saw the opening instantly. Everyone focused fire on the cocoon. Now! Hale, Vex, and Kale unleashed everything they had. The chamber erupted in a storm of plasma fire and explosions. The cocoon ruptured, sending tendrils of unnatural energy lashing out in all directions. The half-formed Queen beneath Daniel withered, her body disintegrating into a cascade of decayed matter. And the real Queen screamed, not in rage, not in defiance, in fear. For the first time, she knew she was dying. Daniel fell to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. The chamber trembled. The walls collapsed inward, the entire structure destabilizing. Cole grabbed him by the arm, hauling him up. "We need to move." They ran. Behind them, the Queen's final scream echoed through the dying city. A scream that signaled the end of an empire. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to his feet. His body ached from the fall, and his head swam from the impact. Around him, the others were stirring, groaning as they pushed themselves up. The chamber they had collapsed into was dark, but it pulsed with the same eerie, living energy as the rest of the underground structure. And in the center of it all, she was emerging. The cocoon that had encased Zelzira was now cracked and broken, releasing tendrils of mist that slithered across the floor like living things. The air vibrated with an unnatural hum, a sound that made Daniel's skull ache. Then the Queen moved. Her body had changed, twisted and elongated. Her exoskeleton had become a deep obsidian black, pulsing with veins of violet energy. Her once multiple eyes had fused into two burning orbs, radiating something deeper than just intelligence. Something ancient. Something wrong. Kale scrambled backward. "This is impossible. She is transcending into something beyond flesh." Zelzira's voice slithered into their minds, bypassing speech entirely. "You should not have come." The words were not spoken. They were imprinted, seared into their thoughts like a brand. Cole fired first. His rifle, discharged a concentrated plasma, burst directly at her chest. The shot struck, exploding into a burst of white-hot energy. She did not flinch. She absorbed it. The glow in her eyes intensified. And then she lifted a hand. Without warning, Cole was lifted into the air, his entire body twisting unnaturally. He let out a choked gasp, his limbs convulsing as though something was rewriting him from the inside out. Daniel's stomach turned. He didn't know what she was doing, but he knew one thing. Cole was dying. "Stop!" Daniel roared, his voice hoarse. And she did. Cole dropped like a rag doll, his body twitching but alive. The Queen turned her gaze toward Daniel, as if truly noticing him for the first time. "Interesting," she murmured into his mind. "You do not belong here." Daniel clenched his fists. His entire life, he had been underestimated, ignored, overshadowed by the more experienced soldiers, the war-hardened veterans. And yet, here he stood, facing something none of them could understand. He took a step forward. "You don't belong here either," he said, his voice shaking but steady. "You weren't meant to become this." The Queen's mandibles curled into something resembling a smile. "And yet, I have. The cycle must be completed." Daniel's mind flashed back to the stories he had heard, the whispers of what the Zyphri truly feared. The Voidborn, ancient beings that existed outside of time, entities that consumed entire civilizations. The Zyphri had spent millennia ensuring their species would never be susceptible to their corruption. But Zelzira had invited it, and now she was becoming one. Daniel's hands clenched. If she completed this transformation, she would not just become a ruler of the Zyphri. She would become a god, and she would end them all. "No," he whispered. Then, louder, firmer, "no." She tilted her head, intrigued. "And what will you do, little human?" Daniel's mind raced. There had to be a way. The Zyphri were a species of pure control. Their entire existence revolved around order, around keeping themselves from becoming something chaotic. She had to be fighting it, some part of her still resisting. And Daniel knew how to break her. He took another step forward. "You were their queen. You ruled because you were the strongest, the smartest. But tell me, what are you now?" She stared. Daniel kept going. "Look at you. You're not their queen anymore. You're a slave to something else." Her form flickered. Just for a second. A crack in the perfect transformation. Kale's eyes widened. "It's working." Daniel pressed on. "You're not ascending. You're losing yourself." Zelzira's mandibles twitched. The air around her wavered, as if reality itself were uncertain of her existence. For the first time, doubt crept into her burning eyes. And in that moment, Daniel saw something. A fragment of the Queen's past. Memories not his own. A vision of her before she became this thing. A ruler. A warrior. A mind of pure logic. And fear. She had feared this fate. She had never wanted this. Daniel felt something inside him shift, an instinct deeper than thought. He reached forward, his hand passing through reality itself, and touched her mind. The world shattered. Daniel's mind spiraled into infinity. He wasn't touching Zalzira's body. He was touching something deeper, a consciousness far beyond his own, a vast ocean of thoughts, memories, and something far more terrifying, the presence of the Voidborn. He could feel it writhing, vast and infinite, stretching across time and space. It was not a being. It was a concept, a hunger that had no form, only intention, and it was claiming her. Daniel felt his thoughts unraveling, his own identity being sifted through like grains of sand. He saw himself from 1,000 perspectives at once, his life, his failures, his insignificance in the grand scheme of the cosmos. He wasn't special. He wasn't a hero. He was nothing. Yes, the Voidborn whispered into the depths of his mind. You understand now. You are dust. Less than dust. Daniel screamed, not in pain, but in defiance. Because that was the thing the Voidborn didn't understand. Humans had always been dust. Insignificant. Small. Weak. But they had never accepted it. From the moment they had gazed at the stars, they had refused to remain dust. They had fought, bled, suffered, and survived. And now Daniel was fighting. He reached deeper, clawing through Zalzira's mind, past the layers of corruption, past the transformation, past the part of her that had given up, and found it. A single fragile memory, a throne room, the vast Zyphery empire at her feet. She had been so proud, so strong. She had fought for her empire, for her people, for order. And now, she was nothing more than a vessel for something else. Daniel ripped that memory forward and shoved it into the forefront of her mind. The queen froze. Her burning eyes flickered. The Voidborn screeched, not in rage, not in triumph, but in something it had never felt before. Loss. Because for the first time, Zalzira remembered who she was. Her form shuddered. The corruption recoiled, as though something inside her was rejecting it. Her burning gaze turned to Daniel. You are nothing. You should be nothing. Daniel clenched his fists. Then why are you listening to me? She snarled, but it wasn't the snarl of an all-powerful being. It was the sound of someone fighting for control. The Voidborn shrieked, trying to pull her back into the abyss. The chamber shook, the air cracking as reality split around them. And then, she chose. With a final, agonizing cry, Zalzira tore herself free. The energy around her imploded, folding in on itself, ripping apart the corruption that had nearly consumed her. The Voidborn let out one last, ear-splitting scream before it was dragged back into the nothingness from which it had come. And then, silence. The world stopped shaking. The air settled. Zalzira fell to her knees. Her body was changed, still scarred by what she had nearly become. Her once obsidian exoskeleton was cracked, her burning eyes dimmed. She looked at Daniel, not with hatred, but with understanding. You, her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. You are nothing, and yet you have changed everything. Daniel swallowed hard. His body trembled with exhaustion, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. You were already strong, he said quietly. You just needed to remember why. A slow, strange smile spread across the queen's face. You will make an interesting ruler. Daniel blinked. Wait, what? Zalzira turned to the remaining Zyphery. They had witnessed everything. The fall, the transformation, the defiance, and they knelt before him. Daniel's heart pounded. I'm just a human. I can't. Zalzira placed a hand on his shoulder. The fate of the Zyphery has changed. And you, Daniel Walker, have become its new center. Cole groaned from where he lay. Holy shit, he muttered. The kid just took over the Galactic Empire. Kale grinned, shaking his head. I did not see that coming. Daniel swallowed hard, staring at the thousands of Zyphery kneeling before him. This wasn't how he expected his day to go. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what the galaxy needed. And as the stars above flickered in silent witness, the future of an empire was rewritten by a single human boy.